Please welcome Travis Heard, Head of Finance, Operations and Strategy, Outerknown, with Rob Keve, Chief Executive Officer and Co-founder, Flow Commerce.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here introducing Travis Heard. I'm Rob Keve, the co-founder of Flow, which I'll introduce in a second, but also wanted to first welcome Travis. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure, thank you.
Travis is the CFO and COO of Outerknown, and it feels suitable that we should be one of the last presentations because so many of the themes that have been talked about all day resonate with Outerknown. Celebrity-driven, digital first, sustainability, activism, even retail, and now going global. Yeah. And so hopefully we can touch on these themes and crystallize them all together. First, by way of brief introduction on Flow, we're honored to work with Outerknown amongst our many clients. Flow is a B2B software as a service platform to help brands go global, to do it in a simple, flexible way, so they don't need to invest heavy resources on the e-commerce side, on the payment side, and on the shipping side to address 200 countries, but rather do it after one simple integration. So I won't go into all the details, but Flow is modular. There are 5 aspects to going global. One is making sure that the site itself presents in local currency, clean, rounded prices. The second is around duties and tax, making sure they're calculated and displayed. The third is around shipping, to ensure you can ship quickly and cheaply internationally. The fourth is around payment methods, making sure that regardless of where the consumer is, they can use a local payment method, so WeChat in China and so forth in Germany. And finally, that you've got the right configurations for each country around the world. That's Flow, and we're here to talk to you primarily about Travis's experience at Outerknown in going global.
So just to introduce Outerknown, I've had the pleasure of working with Outerknown since our co-founder, Kelly Slater, came to us very early on and said, he asked us questions. He asked, what are we wearing and where is it coming from? And so that kind of started, those questions kind of started a journey into a sustainable apparel company. Long before it kind of became the buzzword and what you see as trending topics in fashion today. So about 5 years ago, we set out, actually more like 7 years ago, we set out on a mission to create, to kind of change the model and create a more sustainable apparel company from the ground up. And so we worked with Kelly Slater and John Moore to brand it Outerknown, kind of always striving to push the limits of what we thought was possible. Within that, we choose to, it's a mission-based company focused on using preferred materials, so organic cottons, recycled polys, recycled nylon, and just low impact materials. So much of our impact from apparel companies come from the raw materials we make. So we embrace that from the very beginning, which has allowed us to really thrive in this setting. And we always wanted to stay true to kind of who we are, more coastal, casual, and so you'll see our best products tend to be clothes you want to hang out in, you want to live in, you want to go to the beach in, and just really continuing to drive with that lifestyle first. And so it's been an amazing journey, and we're just getting started.
Fantastic. And in case there's anyone in the room who doesn't know Kelly Slater, he is the 11-time world champion surfer, and actor and author and activist and entrepreneur and many other things. So the 5 topics we wanted to quickly cover today initially focused on Outerknown, and then I'll try to broaden it across our many brands that we work with, what they're experiencing in their journey to go global, why going global, why do it in the first place, when to do it, what the challenges are, what the opportunity is, and finally, what the business case is for doing it. So Travis, would you be kind enough to just talk, if you rewind to when you first made the decision to go global, what was the thinking behind it? What was the motivation for wanting to address a global audience?
Yeah, so when you're founded by the world's best surfer who has a broad appeal globally, Australia, Brazil, Japan, Europe, there's always been that kind of draw from the international community to have a presence. And so from the very beginning, we always wanted to allow our e-commerce store to be accessible and products to be shoppable from any point on the globe. And so we initially started with the idea of opening up our e-commerce shop to all foreign countries. He obviously has a large following. We had the backing of some very strong international companies that also had global aspirations, and we also were able to sell and launch globally with key distributors in Australia and Europe and Japan. So it was really kind of a cornerstone of the brand ethos to be on the global stage. I think that was one of our biggest reasons in wanting to go global. Social media now makes it so that you can tell a story to a global audience regardless of what country they're actually in. And so we wanted to embrace that and tell a holistic story from the beginning.
Right. Perfect. And if we take a step back and look at why many brands go global, if you look on the right-hand side, it shows how prevalent shopping internationally is already. 2/3 of consumers in the major markets have already purchased or purchased frequently cross borders. You can see which countries are at the top, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, UK, China. It's very commonplace. If you look at the reasons why brands go global, one of the main ones is it's just so easy for consumers to find brands regardless of where they are. It's not a traditional bricks and mortar model, obviously, where you need to gain familiarity by walking into stores. The global nature of search, mobile commerce, leads you to brands regardless of where they are. Social media following, not just celebrities and influencers, but of all varieties, doesn't know boundaries either. And so you start attracting influence followers from all around the world, and that becomes the traffic that drives to your site. Celebrity founder, cheap customer acquisition costs. Obviously, US is a mature market. As you look around the globe, you'll see very similar demographics to your existing customers, but in markets where it's much cheaper to acquire those customers. So looking for those hotspots, if you like. And finally, as you just mentioned, Travis, oftentimes brands set up channels and wholesale and distribution agreements. And so there's end consumer awareness generated by these, which in turn drives to the .com and becomes an opportunity for a direct-to-consumer purchase. And then if we turn back to Outerknown, the question, I think, is when? You could have gone global day one. You could have waited another 10 years. Why was the timing when it was?
So in the case of Outerknown, we wanted to go global from the very beginning, and we tried to with a different partner. And it was a little challenging. I think cross-border commerce, while you'll see some people really thriving in it, a lot of others are challenged by logistics, shipping expenses, conversion, currency, checkout, fraud, et cetera. And we experience those same things. As the e-commerce platforms continued to develop and progress, we went through a replatforming, and we ended up moving over to Shopify Plus, which was a very native and partner for Flow.io. And for us, that was the shift. That was kind of the unlock. We were constantly hearing your prices are more expensive, your shipping rates are too high, your duty calculation is wrong. And that was from your international customers. So if you were lucky enough to be able to convert them once, the chance of you converting them a second time after a poor experience was very small. So for us, it was important to find the right solution, and that's kind of how we ended up through our due diligence finding Flow and the kind of the offering that you guys had.
Perfect. Thank you. As we look again to the many brands we work with, the reasons why they time going global, the first one, and probably the most common, is simply looking at the site traffic hitting their site and contrasting that with the level of international sales they're doing. On average, the largest 400 digital native brands in the US have about 35 to 40% of their site traffic coming from overseas, and yet less than 5% of their direct-to-consumer sales will come from overseas. So that's a big opportunity, and when you see that, clearly that's the right time to start to capitalize on that. Strong international demand, depending on what segment you're selling, oftentimes there'll be very strong pockets of international demands that should be capitalized on. Awareness being built through channels, wholesale, celebrity, PR mentions, driving traffic to your site. Preempting competition, we've seen this quite a bit recently. Brands launching in a particular segment, they're worried local competitors will spring up in Australia, in Canada, in UK, and continental Europe, and they want to preempt that and have a good direct-to-consumer offering with a strong local customer experience. And for the more traditional brands, if they've saturated the domestic market, clearly, if you're looking for growth, going international is the most obvious next step. Thirdly, Travis, if we turn back to Outerknown, you mentioned some of the challenges already around currency, around duties, tax, shipping, payments. Would you mind just talking to some of those? Because I think oftentimes we all underestimate how difficult it is to shop and sell cross-border.
Yeah. I mentioned a few of them just in terms of the logistics and providers. And I think international e-commerce tends to be very controlled by the groups that are actually shipping the packages. So they don't give you a lot of tools to be able to run your business. And we've felt that acutely from early on. I think for us, for an international offering, is very important that you are able to align with your wholesale partners and have global promotions that are both seasonally appropriate in the correct markets, as well as priced appropriately within those specific markets. So there's the logistics side, which I touched on. Then there's the customer experience and the levers around how you run your business and how you control that international site experience on your website. And I think before we'd come across, and I have to be perfectly honest, when we first talked to Flow.io, they're like, oh, we can do this, this, and that. And we're like, oh, okay, I don't know if that's really achievable. I mean, at this point, it was more dynamic than what you had on Shopify, which was already very far along. And we're like, okay, well, let's roll this out. And it allowed us to control pricing, exclude products in different countries on a country-by-country basis. It allowed us to be able to apply different checkout methods that were both local as well as duties paid versus unpaid and other shipping options within the global community by country. And that was something where all of a sudden we have a group in Australia and a wholesale business in Australia where they're going to be launching products on a different cycle. Well, how does that marry up to our domestic market without giving us the ability to launch products at different times that are correct within their market? And so we've also done certain partnerships with like co-branded products where there's certain territories that it should not be sold and certain territories that it should be sold for a certain price. So this just allowed us to be able to run our business in a dynamic way and control inventory, pricing, and even just the offering in a way that on the back end was at our control. And so I think the challenge generally internationally has been there's one offering and you just maybe can convert it into a local currency. Flow allowed us to be able to pick and choose what was offered, when it was offered, how much it was offered for, and how it was received.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Better than I could have said. And I should say that my co-founder in Flow was the co-founder of Guilt, and it was his painful, visceral experience of trying to go international with Guilt and their flash sales that had us found Flow. Mm-hmm. And it was all of those pain points you were describing that he was challenged with. And so when we set up Flow, we tried to solve it once and for all. These are the pain points when we poll the market that consumers on the right side and merchants on the left side articulate as the challenges why cross-border is difficult. And it's death by 1,000 cuts, and we're not going to list each one of them. It's not as one thing was the silver bullet, it's everything that Travis mentioned that erodes conversion. And so if you really want to lift your international conversion and make it closer to your international traffic percentage, you have to address each of these pain points, from shipping to duties and tax, to currency, to payment methods, to privacy policies, to cheap and fast international shipping, and to do it as consistently and cohesively with your brand and brand personality as brands do today in their domestic markets. So now we were just going to talk from the pain points into the solution. How do you go about thinking, how do you think about the 200 markets that you sell in? Mm-hmm. How do you localize? How do you think about which ones to have a different consumer experience than others?
So it's interesting, and just kind of continuing to build on that customer experience. Well, okay, cool. So you have inklings into what Australia wants and when they want it, what Brazil wants, what Japan wants, and layer in the partnerships that you're doing and when product's available and what the pricing should be. But in a digital world, you get to test everything and validate whether it's accurate or not. And so something that we were able to kind of put in place pretty early on was the A/B testing. So we could actually put in play two different scenarios and see exactly how they worked out. Is it a better conversion at free ship threshold, or $100, $200? How does that play both economically on the back end as well as for the consumer on the front end? Do they prefer to see duties added into the cost of the price before they purchase it or after at the cart? You can see where the cart abandonment happens, and you can test and kind of verify what you believe to be true. And we've been horribly wrong on some hypotheses, and then we've been like, oh, well, duh, we knew that, but now we have the data to prove that out. And so I think for us, it's been that type of technology to be able to have that dynamic testing has been really, really important on tackling the international market. We continue to we're about 50 people, so we don't necessarily know who all the right partners are in the right areas. I think payment methods are a great one. Is it Klarna or Afterpay, or what is the local processor? And we don't know. We don't want to deal with that. That's not something that we really want to spend our time on. So we need to rely on partners that are able to vet them and then also reduce our fraud as well. And so, I mean, that's really where we've been able to provide a better localized experience and continue to strive to improve that through new technology that you guys are rolling out, but also through what our customers are telling us on what they like.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, international is 200 markets, and most brands that go international, they'll focus on the larger ones. Clearly, you're not going to deal with the complexity of 200 different markets, but maybe the top 10 or 20 account for a good portion of the sales, and those are the ones you want to fine-tune to make sure that the consumer experience is well thought through in those markets. And consumers in Germany naturally buy and behave differently than those in Australia, from those in Singapore and those in London. And our platform, just to plug it for a second, allows the brands like Outerknown and many others to do all of that, to manage their pricing, to ensure that it's rounded correctly, whether to include duties, whether to include sales tax before rounding or not. Should you end in .00 in this country, or .99, a multiple of 5, multiple of 10, those kinds of questions. Duties and taxes is a big challenge. If you're selling and shipping internationally without duties prepaid, then the consumer's paying for it on the doorstep, and they're charged additional fees by the carriers. And it's an awful shopping experience, as Travis was saying earlier. The chance of that customer buying a second time is slim. And so you're investing in customer acquisition, and you have poor lifetime value. So you want to be able to present duties and tax on the site. You want cheap and quick international shipping, the right payment methods. We have 100 on the site, but populating the right 5 or 10 by country. And you want to find the perfect setting in the core countries. So moving on to the money shot, what are the results? How have you found international? Is there a good business case for it?
Yeah, for us, and kind of as we expected, the international market, it makes up about low double digits in our business. And there's definitely a strong appetite for the products. as we've continued to grow with Flow, we've seen our business double internationally, and I think that's always, when you're in this stage, you want to continue to see doubling of the business each and every year. So that's really great. But when you layer on the other elements of it, where the experience is better, the costing on the shipping it made us much more profitable, and the offering itself was now, our global messaging was able to be conveyed to every corner of the world, not just domestic only. Oh, sorry, that's not for you guys. We can't do a gift with purchase, or we can't run that special value add for you. We've been able to see our business continue to grow through the use of Flow International, or Flow.io International.
Great. We have plenty of general business cases we can share. We have a standout side, not only with the case studies, but also a research report about how consumers behave in the main markets, which is freely available on our site. So please come by the booth and pick those up. So finally, I guess the 5 points to mention, I can't read that from here. So know the potential. Look at your international site traffic, look at your international sales, and see how close they are to one another. If there's a big gap, that's an enormous opportunity for you. Don't wait. Oftentimes, brands wait too long, and competitors come into the market. Capitalize on it when you see an opportunity to go global early. The segment is the same internationally. If you're focused on millennials, for instance, who are interested in sustainable brands, they're the same in Australia as they are in Singapore, as they are in LA, and oftentimes cheaper to acquire. So think about it from a global perspective. And finally, think of simple ways of addressing it. It's a big, complicated domain. You don't want to spend too long tweaking different shippers, different payment methods, different ways of approaching it. Look for simple, scalable solutions, such as Flow, to do that. With that, I think we're open for questions. Thank you very much. Any questions?
This is a question for Travis, and that is, has the global growth sort of followed where you thought your pockets of opportunity were previously, or have you been surprised with any of the sort of international development?
I think it's not, there haven't been too many surprises. I think there's a few countries that popped up Switzerland is one, which we never, just randomly, you're like, oh, okay, there's some customers that really like us in Switzerland. And I think Japan's another one that we expected to be pretty strong, and it has been. And if you were to go a little deeper with the localization of both currency and select language, there's those types of countries have been particular shining lights. Hong Kong was doing well. I'm not sure. It's kind of fallen off a little bit.
They have other priorities.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that you guys, as you mentioned, were early on to making a sustainability story part of your brand. How has it been now that a lot of other brands are also embracing that storyline? Has it made it harder to compete? Has it affected sales at all?
For us, we've always embraced kind of the open source. We want to change the industry, and so we think that as it becomes a larger focal point within the general conversation, we're definitely, we're at the forefront with others, and so it's only, rising tides lifts all boats from our perspective. I think it becomes more fun because a point of differentiation, which used to be sustainability, is no longer as strong. Kind of like organic food, as soon as Walmart started putting organic on everything, it didn't quite have the same punch. But that also, for us, we as storytellers within the Outerknown realm, it's always been important to try to differentiate based off the product themselves. We've always said they're not going to buy it if they don't like it just because it's sustainable. They need to like the product first, and then they go, oh, and it's sustainable. And ideally, we have a lot of different layers within that we can kind of play on and continue to embrace.
Can you talk about a little bit about what's next for the brand in 2020?
What the what?
What's next for the brand in 2020?
Oh, yeah, so we are opening our first retail shop in Manhattan Beach next week, right before the holiday rush. We'll continue to expand. We launched women's 6 months ago. And so that is just getting started. So we're really excited about the future there. And then we launched denim a year ago, and so that's really starting. Initially, that was primarily online only, but next year it'll become a little bit more of a focus on getting our, we call them C genes, social, environmental accountability, and getting those out into the marketplace in a bigger way. I think denim's always been something that's very exciting, and obviously a massive opportunity for us. But I think the touch and feel and the omni-channel approach, particularly in jeans, it's going to be very important.
This is a question about flow. Are you seeing business flow the other way from companies outside the U.S. With access to, language and all of the other things you talked about, targeting this market now where they might not have had the wherewithal on their own?
Yes, absolutely. Business flows in all directions. The US market is large and attractive to brands all over the world. So the next wave we're seeing now is European brands. A lot of it depends on the relative strength of the currency. So euro to dollar strength and weakness determines the level of trade in those directions. But we do see that. And our goal is to create an ecosystem of trade flowing in both directions, because then it makes both shipping and payments and currency cheaper for both parties. Great. Please join me in thanking Travis Heard of Outerknown.